there are two, I think, facets to the digital divide. One is about age and experience and the way brains are wired, that we're born in a certain era, and the other is poverty.
When we think about a digital divide, it's best not to make too much of it, because it can become the latest way of legitimating our way of not thinking about the very strong material, historical, and other divides that there are.
And poverty and socioeconomic class makes a huge difference in the amount of access, the kind of availability of resources.
In which case you have some people that are still quite destitute in a post-colonial world. You have some people that are sort of working for little and getting by or not. In actual situations like export processing zones that were supposed to be temporary, where supposedly they were going to gain the fruits of their labor. And then some of us that gain all the goods because we're at the center of that system.
Another aspect of it, we frequently get a lot of immigrant population coming in to the computer learning centers, especially because they can't get appointments for immigration services any other way.
World language classes are offered for new Americans through the Library Links program and Hennepin County Library Outreach.
We teach a computer basics workshop, which is a come as you are, come one, come all class, where we sit people down with the online tutorials that we have available, and we give them as much volunteer and instructor one-on-one time as we possibly can.
We have libraries that are filled as soon as school is out with kids on the computers doing the kinds of things that folks who are the haves in our society are able to do by virtue of having a computer in their home.
Technology fits into a very complex world that already exists, and it's unlikely that it will simply, give agency to everybody so everybody's free and suddenly everybody has enough to eat, suddenly everybody has a meaningful job, suddenly it erases a system where there are certain privileges and certain means of production where certain people get things. But what it will do is become part of that world in interesting ways. And we're just figuring that out.
This is about poverty and about the difficulty of not having the educational attainment that's possible when you are middle class or upper class. When you are in a lower class, you really have a different way that you're functioning on a needs basis that can only look out a couple of weeks, because that's how far you can plan.
One of the things I do is I spend a lot of time reassuring people who've never used a computer before that it's not something to be afraid of, that they can't break it. We get a lot of people who have trouble working the mouse.
The program as it looks right now is only about 6 months old. However, we've been offering classes as Hennepin County Library and as Minneapolis Public Library for many, many years.
Depending on the location, we do get a lot of people who've never used computers before, partly because they've never been able to afford them, or the schools they've gone to didn't have access to them.
One of the things that I tell students when I teach is, you couldn't come in here and expect to learn how to play the piano in 2 hours. The same thing is true when you're taking a computer class.
I like to reassure the people who come in to learn how to use a mouse, trust me, nowhere else in your life if you learned how to do this, it's going to be awkward for a while.
It's going to require practice and dedication. And if you think about the haves in our society who own pianos, it's a lot easier to learn how to play the piano when you own one, rather than when you rent one or you go to a public place that has a piano and you play there.
I've had an 88-year-old who has come in to learn the mouse. She just, out of the blue, she just started arriving and she said, well, my grandkids are all in college and I got to learn this here computer. We had her using mouse aerobics, and then she felt she was comfortable. When she finally felt she was comfortable with it, she said, okay, now let's try the typing. And at the end of the day, that day, she said to me, well, that mouse aerobics, It's a real workout.
We provide access to information via the web, via print materials, and online, just by offering computers and instruction. With databases, we have Learning Express Library, Custom Guide, different kinds of online software that people can use to learn job skills, to learn computer programs, but also take practice tests.
There are always more people who need to know how to make them out, how to use a mouse, how to go to the internet and look for work, how to apply online. And just when I think, okay, we finally started meeting the demand, more people come. I've had people come back and tell me, you know, oh, well, I went out, I applied a couple of places, I got work.
Hennepin County Library has a Facebook fan page. We have a Twitter account with over 500 followers. We are absolutely putting our foot right into the social networking realm.
The internet is still really, really young in terms of technology.
We aren't going to have the same kind of role for the younger generation. The younger generation coming through here, access is the piece of the digital divide that we're providing.
Sometimes I see the digital divide discourse used as a way to act as if, gee, it's too bad that those poor people don't have that and that's causing some sort of rift or whatever, when in fact I would say the sort of great gradations and inequalities are there, and that of course anything that comes along, including online technologies, is just going to map onto that and potentially in some ways exacerbate it.
I think that some of the new computers, the little microcomputers like the Asus EE or Asus EE, that's one way that the barrier to entry is being removed. When a laptop costs $100 instead of $2,000 or $3,000.
When we look at some of these technologies, they're not that complicated. I mean, especially like a cell phone. What more does a cell phone do for somebody that has a whole lot of money that it doesn't do, as far as just the technology, for somebody that doesn't have much money at all? They do pretty much the same thing.
Products like OpenOffice, Gmail and Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets are free applications people can use, and that also helps bridge some of that digital divide.
These things that allow people to get access to technologies are good. Now, as far as thinking of them as a panacea, that partly fits into that ideology I was talking before, as if giving people computers is somehow going to erase histories and systems that tell somebody that if they are born poor in a once colonized nation, that somehow now just giving computers is going to do as much as making sure that there's democracy in the workplace so that people can unionize and actually have some control over their actual life.
Wireless access is a really big issue around the country. We certainly have citywide Wi-Fi in Minneapolis, but it still costs money. There are still dead spots around the city.
Language barriers just add to the problem. But if you're patient, sometimes you can't overcome them though. And it's so worthwhile when you do.
Knowledge, we live in a society now where knowledge is an asset, and having access to knowledge nowadays is more than just a luxury, it's a necessity.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't talk about the digital divide, but once you're talking about divides, you better talk about the things that it's mapping onto in order to really understand it. Or it becomes, for example, the way of just really not talking about divides, you know, as if, you know, these divisions and everything were just born of the fact that some people have access to computers and others don't.